Hey guys, real quick before we start the video, I want to direct you to the community tab on my channel. I am currently running an event for you, the viewers, to rate every single Monster Hunter monster from 1 to 5 stars. This project is going to be a bit of a run back from the 20th anniversary popularity poll and is meant to allow everyone to voice their opinion on every monster, so we can get a big picture look at how the whole community feels about the entire Monster Hunter bestiary. There will be a new poll on the community tab every single day at noon Eastern Standard Time, and all polls will remain live on the channel, so you can answer any of them at any time. You will not miss out if you miss the poll for the day. I will be updating numbers all the way from now until the end of October when the last polls have been run, and in October or November, we're going to have a massive video event where your comments will be read, all the numbers will be crunched, and the monsters will be reordered based on how you all voted. Every vote on every poll matters, and anyone has a chance to have their comment read in the video itself. And if you want to help me get more data and reach the broader Monster Hunter community, I'd appreciate a like on this video and, maybe hit the subscribe button to help this channel grow. It'll put me and this project in front of more eyes. Okay, no more YouTuber CTA shilling. Here's the video you actually clicked on. Thank you. Hello and welcome one and all. It's time to take the second generation Monster Hunter monsters and smack them on a tier list. I like doing these. You like watching these. Let's have a little bit of fun today, shall we? Yeah. So, we're going to go over second generation. So that's going to be Dose, Freedom 2, and Freedom Unite. And I gotta tell you, second generation in particular is among the most influential, rock-solid generations out there. First generation really kind of set the stage, and then third, fourth, and fifth kind of just keep building on things and playing around with new mechanics and experimenting with a whole bunch of stuff and really kind of pushing a lot of boundaries. But second generation, I think, sets a ton of really good trends, lays a lot of groundwork, and overall just has a lot of really solid stuff. Because with some of the newer games, you get experimental. Some of those experiments don't really work. But I think there's just a general air of solidness around second generation that really, doing a little bit of watch back and research and reflection, I don't think there's anything here that's particularly bad. There's some stuff I don't like just on like a conceptual level. There ain't much that's just flat out garbage. Maybe like one or two, but even then, I don't know, there's some gag monsters in here we're gonna cover, but they're designed to be gag monsters, so do I really want to go, full at them? But, let's talk about the tiers real quick. As you can tell just by reading them, I'm being pretty nice to second generation. I have a high opinion of it. So, fundamental phenomenon. There's a lot of monsters in here that set a lot of big trends that really kind of defined where Monster Hunter was gonna go going forwards. There's a lot of stuff here that just set really excellent precedent for game design and monster design and all that good stuff. And really, the third, fourth, and fifth wouldn't be what they were without the second, honestly. That's how sequence of events goes like this, but I really think a lot of great trends were set here. Keep them on the roster. They're not the absolute cream of the crop, best of the best, but there's a lot of stuff on here. Where they're just really solid. I keep saying the word solid. I feel like that's just a word that describes second generation really well. But they just work. Their concept is sick. They have some cool stuff to them. There's might be a couple of monsters that go a little bit more above and beyond, but there's monsters in the second generation that I think deserve to just stay and just keep being roster mainstays. Just needs tweaks. A couple of these guys are a little bit older and haven't had the updates that they really deserve. Some of them, are still just kind of a little bit basic. We're still kind of in the early years of subspecies and variants where they really just need a little bit of work. Haven't quite found their footing yet. Really need someone to come along and have a great idea for them. And you do those 1, 2, maybe 3 things and you have something really good, but they're just not there yet. Then you have a bit weak monsters that their gimmick's not the best, their combat's not the strongest, whatever ideas were behind them weren't the most inspired, but are they garbage? No. And then bottom, we're gonna have bad for second gen. Again, second gen I think is probably one of the most consistent in terms of quality. I'd say all the other ones have bigger spikes and bigger valleys. This one feels really kind of compacted in around the same range. So, monster might be bad, but it's like second generation bad. Is it really bad? So let's get started, right? We're gonna go bird wyverns first. We got 2 bird wyverns we're gonna cover. We have Giadrome, or Giadrome, who comes from the white subspecies of Velociprey. They were eventually turned just into their own thing. So there used to be just white Velociprey on the map, just kind of sprinkled in there. Took those and then turned them into their own creatures out in the Snowy Mountains or the Arctic Ridge. Called them Giaprey and Giadrome, or Giaprey and Giadrome. Not 100% sure. I think I'll typically be saying Gia instead of Gia. So I have some fondness for the guy, right? Though definitely just a white Velocidrome with a blue crest and blue claws and an ice attack. Giadrome was my first monster outside of Tri, because I played Tri first, and then I went backwards and looked at Freedom Unite, because Freedom Unite was this massive compilation of a bulk of the stuff that came before. Monsters specifically, right? So Giadrome was like this first monster that I took a crack at in this adventure I took going backwards and kind of seeing what the history of Monster Hunter pre-Tri was. So I have fond memories of the dude. Fundamentally, I'd say even more than like his cousins Gendrome and Iodrome, there's even less changes because he is really just a palette swap with that takes Iodrome's ranged attack and puts ice on it instead of poison. Cool thing about that though, it does not that it just does ice, but it does the snowman effect, which I think is the first appearance, I think would be in or around 2nd generation, because I don't think stuff like Snowman and the Muddied effect come around in 1st generation. I think that's a 2nd gen thing. So you have an intro level monster, first monster you're going to fight in Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite, and he's got this like really debilitating status where you're locked in an ice ball and stuck walking around in that and have to learn through that, which is kind of neat, right? You give that to the first guy right out of the gate, so it's something kind of cool. For that reason, it's a bit more interesting than the poison projectile attack from Iodrome. And I gotta be honest, I like how Giadrome looks a little bit more than Velocidrome. I think the white scaling with the blue crest and claws looks a bit better than the azure scaling with the red crest and claws. I think as iconic as like the azure and red are for Velocidrome, I think that Giadrome has like just maybe slightly better consistency in the colors, like they work a little bit better together, really kind of sell the ice monster aspect a little bit. But he still also suffers from Gen 1, Gen 2 Drome symptoms, where small monster, teeny little hurt box, lots of itty bitty hops, and really only kind of like 2 attacks. I feel like if they go back and really want to look at the old world dromes, there's a little bit more that could be going on here. I might bump him up later. I feel like he's going to be high up on a bit weak. He suffers from some of the same issues as his cousins, a lot of copy-paste repetition, and he is the 4th in that line. So by this point, it gets a little bit old. I will reserve the right to maybe bump him to the bottom of just needs tweaks, because I do like Giadrome quite a bit. Yeah, no, he definitely, the old world dromes need a little bit of love. Him coming in 4th place is a little bit rough. The snowman effect on him, though, I think does give him a little bit of points, and if he doesn't get into just need tweaks, I think he's probably going to be a little bit higher up in a bit weak. Then we have Hypnocatrice, one of the now 3 monsters we have received from Monster Hunter Frontier. Himself and Lavasioth came in Freedom Unite. Unlike Lavasioth, we haven't seen Hypnoc since Freedom Unite. So, in a mainline stance, Hypnoc's been a little bit left behind. I do want to touch on his Frontier incarnations a little bit, because I do know them fairly well. Hypnoc's a cool one. I feel like he's kind of like this interesting cross between the Yeon Kutku type of like very prototype template bird wyvern, and then you get into like the Acnosom Quirupeko type of bird wyverns that we get a little bit later, where they're kind of branch out a little bit more, get into their own personalities, very, very kind of flamboyant type of birds. I feel like Hypnoc's kind of like right in the middle, because he does have some of his own pizzazz and his own flamboyancy and some very kind of vibrant and lively animations, but still has a lot of stuff that's very recognizably taken off of the Kutku template. So he's kind of like this cross-section between those 2 worlds, I think. I think that's unfortunate that we haven't seen Hypnocatrice since Freedom Unite. I think just by a design standpoint, I really like him. Just the dark brown feathers with the bright orange plumage. I think that color contrast looks really good. I think his beak looks really cool. The snaggle tree branch tail that he has is a little odd, but I think the design looks respectable. I think he's one of like the cooler looking birds, kind of with Garuga, where they're going a little bit more cool factor than goofy factor. Again, kind of like between Garuga and those other birds, kind of like a midpoint. And then, you look at his attacks, you look at his animations, he does have the arcing projectile that Kutku has, but it is a much, much further distance, much, much bigger projectile, and it's sleep rather than fire, hence Hypnoc. He does have stuff like pecking attacks and tail spins and whatnot, which aren't particularly interesting. Then you get into some of the attacks he's a little bit better known for, and then you get into his lunges and his kicks, specifically his kicks, is a lot where you get a lot of Hypnoc's personality in his animations. And then if you want to go into the frontier perspective, especially getting into some of his variations and subspecies, you get Hypnocs that dance around and have even more kicks and land so hard that they can kind of hurt their legs, and you can see them like shaking off their legs after taking damage, and they're doing like dive kicks and body slams and whatnot. I'm gonna give Hypnoc definitely a little bit of points because beyond the mainline games, he has some of those extra tweaks and animations that I think he definitely needs. The Freedom Unite Hypnocatrice is definitely a tad plain with some stuff there, but then you get, because Hypnoc being this very classic Frontier monster, Frontier went and treated him very well. Online did too, actually. Online was very favorable to him as well. So beyond mainline, Hypnoc's had a pretty successful career. Hypnoc's always been a monster that I've rooted for to come back, because he has this stuff outside of Freedom Unite that gives him that extra leg up, and because I think just a revamp of the design could look really good. I think he already looks fundamentally pretty damn good. I like Hypnocatrice a lot. I'm going to put him in just needs tweaks, mostly because some of those tweaks are out there, and if they want to just kind of push that envelope, lean more into the kicks, lean more into the sleep and stuff like that, and like the more dancey and jittery type of animations that he has, I think you can have a bird monster or a bird wyvern that is a very, very memorable creature. And again, I think he strikes a lot of balances really well with many of the different avenues of bird wyverns. All right, so King Shakalaka, this is kind of the guy I was talking about. He's a gag monster. So I don't like him fundamentally on a conceptual level, but I know that he's meant to be kind of a joke. So how much do I really want to rag on the guy, right? So the Shakalakas are kind of an interesting concept from a world building standpoint. So you have these big wide environments with these monsters out in them, you have the civilization, and then you have these less civilized tribes out in the world, which is where, a lot of the Lineans are. Monster Hunter World really goes into the Lineans a lot, with the different tribes of Grimalkins and the Gajalaka and the Boa Boa. They go kind of into their cultures a little bit, which is really cool. And that whole trend starts back in second generation with the Shakalaka, which are Lineans related to the felines and the palicos and stuff like that. But they're these little goblin guys in these big masks with these axes and whatnot. And they're odd because they're so non-animalistic. You can kind of buy fighting the Lineans, so the regular felines and Melinks out in the world. You can kind of buy fighting the cats. The Shakalaka always felt very, very like, these are fantasy goblins that found their way into Monster Hunter. Them especially. I think the leg up that the Gajas and the Boas from World do have is that you can like go out and talk to them and go to like where they live and actually like interact with the little cultures they built up. So they kind of feel like these peoples that exist down on the map, and sometimes they attack you, sometimes they don't. The Shakalakas don't quite have that cultural structure that you can investigate, so they really just feel like generic, kind of generic goblin enemies that you would fight in a more conventional fantasy game. And that makes them weird, because then they're kind of just like humanoid enemy dudes waving around axes and whatnot and wearing masks. I think the best thing for the Shakalaka was Chacha and Kiamba in Tri, and that actually kind of turned them more into a people than fantasy goblins. They also just look really weird. Like if you look in the gap in the mask, I'm assuming you're looking at those two little eye holes in the bottom of the mask, like that's where the actual head is, and then they have like the fake head of the mask, I guess like puppeteered on a stick. Very weird looking how they work. And then you have King Shakalaka by himself, removed from his people, and he's a little bit bigger. He's got, I like that he has like a animal pork chop for a weapon, and he's got a barbecue spit on top of his head that he can send fireballs shooting out of. He only really has like 2 or 3 attacks. He has one where he shoots off a bunch of fireballs, and there's one where he goes flinging through the air, screaming his bloody murder and swiping his big pork chop around. It does way more damage than it has any right to. it just feels like a different game. It really feels like the move set itself kind of feels like it's from a different video game. The enemy shape and structure feels like it's from a different video game. They're goofy. I know that they're meant to be a gag. In terms of the combat, in terms of the design, they really don't kind of blend with Monster Hunter's DNA. And like I said, with the boas and the gajas, they don't really blend with the traditional Monster Hunter DNA either. But World kind of seemed to understand that and then give them their own branching path and really kind of work with their culture and whatnot. So that really kind of sets back the Shakalakas even more for me. Because again, they really just feel like, oh, you have monkeys and raptors and boars and whatnot. And then you just have goblins. This isn't a game with goblins, you know what I mean? So I think like conceptually, King Shakalaka is definitely my least favorite monster, just because he doesn't really fit. And then the fight isn't particularly great. The big multi-hit combos aren't particularly fun to deal with. They don't really flow like a monster's attacks typically flow. The barbecue spit attack is kind of funny, but I just don't like him. I don't really like him. I'm forgiving of the fact that he is a gag character, and again, bad for second gen. Like, he's a neat idea. His culture is a neat idea. It got done better and expanded on after King Shakalaka was already gone, I think. And I don't think he's ever going to come back, really. They kind of did like a soft tribute to him with the Gajalaka Chieftain in the Witcher title update for World. And even then, also kind of delved into the fact that, like, the Gajalaka were a people. The chieftain was kind of like a character. This has never really been the case for the king here, and the Shakalaka got development in Tri, the game after the Shakalaka were enemies. Wouldn't mind never seeing them again as enemies. If they brought the Shakalaka back as, like, a culture and as, like, a part of the world in the world building, that I think I would be much more down for. Or if they were done like the Gaja, like the Boa. There's an implementation issue that has been rectified in the future. I feel like I've kind of said this a couple of times. But yeah, no, as is, locked in Freedom Unite Purgatory, don't particularly like him. Okay, Bulldrome. Bulldrome's kind of just a big boar. The design's kind of neat. I really like the tufts of white fur that he has. The asymmetrical tusks is kind of cool. Like, he's a big fluffy boar, and that's a cool design. You know, boars are neat, and he's definitely, I think, like the Bullfangos and Bulldrome kind of take the real-life boar and kind of just, like, stylize them and tweak them up just a little bit and kind of, like, pretty them up a little bit to make some pretty cool-looking enemies, I think. Yeah, no, even in Generations when he came back, and I think he's in Portable Third as well, just kind of never really got anything. Never really got any attention. He was just kind of there. He's got his charge attack, and he's got his head sweep. That's the bulk of it, really. I find Bulldrome to be less offensive than Bullfango, because if you're fighting Bulldrome, you're focusing on Bulldrome. If you're interacting with Bullfango, it's probably because you're trying to fight a different boss. So Bulldrome, I think, lacks the vitriol that the younger ones have, because he is a boss and because he is a target of a fight. And that fight is incredibly manageable and incredibly easy to deal with. I think he's a bit weak. I'm not going to say he's bad. I don't hate him on like a conceptual level. And I guess like the head toss attack where he uses like a get off me tool it's fine enough. He needs something. He needs like 3-4 new attacks. I'd be willing to bet that like Frontier and Online gave him some goofy crap too. I don't know those incarnations for Bulldrome quite as well as I know like the Frontier and Online Hypnox. So I'd be willing to bet that there's like something there that they've done with him to make him kind of goofy and silly. There's like the Elemental Bulldrome in Online. I don't know. Yeah, he's a big boar. He's a big cool looking boar with 2 attacks. Give him something neat. Give him something interesting to do. We're talking about Congalala. Congalala is a keep him on the roster for me. I like Conga a lot. So the dichotomy we have here is we have a gag monster and we have a gag monster. And one of them I think really, really works. The other one not so much. Congalala is a big old goober. He's a gluttonous pink monkey that runs around all over the place farting and flinging poop. And burping. He's just a big doofus. He's cool. I like that he has this mechanic where if he eats different mushrooms, he gains different statuses on his breath attacks. He doesn't even do his breath attacks all that much, so it's not super annoying. But yeah, he can get paralysis, he can get flame breath, he can get poison breath. I think he can get sleep breath, though some of those might be unique to Emerald. We'll talk about Emerald in a second. Yeah, no, different mushrooms that he eats on the map results in different effects. He introduces the stench debuff, which I think is actually a kind of a cool debuff, where he soils all of your consumable goods and making them completely unusable. I think that's a really, really fun status ailment that is potentially really dangerous, but fairly underplayed. I think the most powerful monsters that use stench is probably Emerald Conga and Steel Uragan. It doesn't show up a lot. You could potentially make a pretty dangerous monster out of the stench debuff, but for now it's a bit of a gag debuff considering it falls on generally kind of like lower end monsters. Conga being one of them, definitely the most prominent and prolific user of it. He's goofy. He's got like a hippopotamus head. He's covered in pink fur. His butt and his face turn red when he's angry. He's got this goofy looking dunce cap cone of fur coming out of his hair. His claws are so massively gnarly, overgrown coming out of his hands that it must be incredibly uncomfortable to walk on his hands. A lot of his attacks are based around the fact that he's just so big and chunky and fat that he just throws his weight around as his attacks. So he has his claw sweeps where he'll eventually lose his balance and fall on his ass. He has attacks where he'll just leap up in the air and belly flop. He's just such a cornball loaded up with all this doofy personality, and I really like him for it. Helps that I think his sound design is generally really good. I think his roars and grunts and groans and attack sound effects are just really, really silly without being like too comedic and too cartoony. He's just this big bundle of fun, while also, you know, he can be a little bit dangerous because he has a couple of different statuses on him, and he has, of course, stench. So if you're fighting him kind of like on his difficulty level, he can deck you kind of hard, especially in some of those older games where damage was a little bit higher overall. I think Congalala is a really well-designed monster. Then we look at his subspecies, Emerald Congalala, and I think Emerald is pretty good. I think he's a pretty good subspecies. Overall, as we're getting into second generation, the quality of the subspecies is still not at its all-time high, but we're getting definitely up there. We're getting a couple of new ideas. And a nice thing about some of these first and second generation subspecies is a good chunk of them got to come back in 4 Ultimate, and 4 Ultimate was, for the most part, pretty nice to some of them, and was able to really kind of flesh out, with a couple of little tweaks and pushes and pulls, some subspecies that were very, very palette swappy. Emerald Congalala, I think, was treated pretty well in 4 Ultimates. Also, just design-wise, I think it's a bit of a side grade. They really enunciated the cone head coming out off of his forehead, made it even longer, which makes it look even doofier. The green is a good color, but I still really like the pink. Also, the pink is one big color. The green really kind of dilutes out towards his butt. The white beard, I think, looks really good on him. I really like the beard that they give him. So I think the design's kind of a side grade. I think some parts of it are a little bit better. Some parts of it aren't quite as good. Overall, I think it's a pretty good redesign. He gets all the statuses. So he still has poison, sleep, and paralysis. He has his fire breath, and once you get into 4 Ultimate, he can eat nitro shrooms, and now he can get blast. And he literally gets blast powder explosion fart. That has to hurt like hell, first of all. That's gotta be really painful. You just see this gas cloud of red and orange sparkle dust coming out of the backside of this green monkey. Like, wow, this game... This game's got a bit of a sense of humor, huh? Not only do they increase they give him that new status that Brachydios brings in with Blast, but they also they double down on the fart and the poop. So, with the dung throw that he has out of his tail, they adds more projectiles off of it. Also, kind of interestingly, with a lot of his recovery animations where he's picking himself up off the ground, he'll let off a fart when he's getting up. And that's silly and that's goofy, but it's also kind of a cool technique because Congalala's moveset is very, very exploitable because he has a lot of moves where he knocks himself down. Having a subspecies that covers some of those angles and gives him kind of just like a safety tool is a really cool idea, and it continues to feed into the goofiness and the personality of Congalala. So I think Emerald is quite well put together. Very lucky that he got to come in 4 Ultimate. Emerald's quite good. I think Emerald's quite good. Let's put him right there. Do I like him? I think I might actually like him. I like the design of the regular Congalala, maybe like the smidgest more because he's like the full body pink, and I never really liked how the green on Emerald kind of dilutes out towards the backside. And I think I like the smaller cone head a little bit more than the bigger cone head, but the beard and the green is really, really good. And then, yeah, no, in 4 Ultimate, he gets his blast, he gets his more defensive fart abilities, he gets more poop. So yeah, no, I think they're kind of like right on par with one another, with Emerald getting just those nice little extra tweaks to really kind of expand on Congalala just that little bit more. I think Emerald's quite good. Blangonga. I like Blangonga a lot. I know he's kind of the middle child of the 3 second-generation monkeys. So Conga easily has, like, the most goofy, vibrant personality to him, with all just, like, the tootin' and the poopin' and the belching and whatnot, just this goofy, gross out monster. And then Rajang, being as difficult and as fast as he is, very much cemented himself as this legendarily aggressive, absolute monster among monsters. And then you have Blangonga. And Blangonga is a pretty damn cool ice. I think he's based off like a mandrill, right? Mandrill. And he has some stuff of his own. And then a lot of his physical attacks do go to Rajang. And that kind of makes Blangonga feel a little bit like Ice Rajang, right? So that kind of always hurt him a little bit. I feel like he's always kind of been a little stuck in his younger and older brother's shadows. A little bit. He does have his kind of like, it's not so much an ice beam as it is a coughed up burst of ice that also has the snowman state that Giadrome has, which is pretty cool. He has a couple of really cool animations all his own. Specifically the one where he'll dig up this big block of ice and go flinging it up in front of him, comes crashing down and goes scattering in all different directions. Really cool. He has his dig attacks, which are his own. He also has the smaller Blangos with him, and he can issue in commands and offer up orders to his Blangos, so he's a bit more of a pack monster. You know, Congalala has the smaller Congas, but they don't really fight in any kind of sync. The Blangos do with their pack leader, so that kind of gives him a little bit more of his own. He's also got the cool ability to scratch paintballs off of himself, which is just this very unique trait that really just no other monster does. He has the ability to, like, detrack himself, which is a neat little mechanic. Kind of shows just how intelligent these monkey monsters were supposed to be. Very just kind of, oh, that's something he can do. Like, it's not super baked into his elemental prowess or anything. It's just like a mark of intelligence, which I've always kind of thought was pretty cool about him. I think he definitely, if Blangonga was to come back, I think he would just kind of need a couple of tweaks and changes to his physical attacks just so he can kind of get out from under the Rajang umbrella a little bit. A good thing to look at would probably be the Flame Blangonga from online, because that's kind of exactly what that subspecies did, or lone species rather, is he took a lot of Blangonga's core physical attacks and just added a little bit of an extra chain or effect to him. I think he just needs a couple of tweaks. Good monster, really good design, especially like this render he has is really good. I don't adore the bump on his head. I think he's a monster that's definitely kind of started to get a little bit prettier with age. I think they've gotten his proportions a lot better. They've buffed him up a little bit. They made him shaggier. They've kind of toned down the bump a little bit and made his face like just a little bit less narrow. I think he's definitely kind of like beautified a little bit. I think he looks much better in Generations than he does in Freedom 2, Freedom Unite. And if he comes back, you know, just kind of play around with those proportions a little bit, I think you have a monster that genuinely looks really cool. I think the design has always been quite good. Yeah, no, I think Blangonga's a really good monster that just needs just a little bit more to himself. Just a little bit. He's never been wholly eclipsed, but he just needs a little bit. Then you have the Copper Blangonga. Copper Blangonga is one of the unfortunately forgotten subspecies. You know, we just did that 20th anniversary popularity poll, and he ranked in bottom 10. Not shocked, not a lot of people remember that Copper Blangonga is a thing. I don't think he's bad, though. I don't think he's bad. I just went back and looked at what he could do. So Copper Blangonga has a couple of cool things going for him. Like Emerald, he's one of those rare subspecies that kind of shifts around the design of the core monster a little bit and isn't just like a full, just kind of color swap. So the facial structure is a little bit different. I think the horns that he has coming off of his nose are a little bit different, have a little bit more of a curve to it. Loses the bump off the top of the head and it just kind of smooths down. The render looks quite cool. There's art of him that I think looks excellent. His actual, like, moving around in-game model, there's something that's a little funky looking with the face. It's a very flat and kind of a little bit under-detailed. But I go back to that piece of official art that exists from like the Monster Hunter wiki. I can tell just like how good this dude would look if he was really given some proper attention, if he hadn't been gone for a decade, probably coming up on like 15 years now, because he's one of these monsters that's in Freedom Unite Purgatory. You definitely got something with Copper. Unlike the Emerald Conga, and unlike a lot of these second gen and first gen subspecies, Copper goes way off the beaten trail from the regular Blangonga, and he's out in the desert. Doesn't have his pack with him, but he's out rummaging out in the desert, and they do a couple of interesting things with him. So he goes from throwing big chunks of ice to throwing massive sandstone rocks. He's got a really cool attack where he'll dig underground, come up out of the ground with what said rock, and then just come slam it back down. Very cool animation for a second generation game on the PSP. And then he has a sand breath blast like Blangonga has an ice one. He has more rocks that he can fling on his rock throw. So he's definitely just like a more dangerous version of Blangonga, just kind of like ups the projectile amount, changes up a couple at the fundamentals, blends some of his moves together. Pretty cool. I think the color palette's really good with like the tans and the browns and like the kind of like gray blue on the face and the hands a little bit. I think you have the potential here for a really good looking subspecies that can do some really cool things to kind of change things around with the moveset of the original Blango. The other thing is, as cool as that dig rock slam attack is, he seems to do it a lot because that's like that's his big thing. I'm gonna put him at the bottom of just needs tweaks. I think you have some good groundwork here that needs a little bit of extra love, time, and attention. I think we're good. I think we're pretty golden with Copper Blangonga. I think Copper Blangonga for Wilds would be pretty sick, honestly. All right, let's talk about one of the just absolute kings of Monster Hunter, Rajang. If there's any argument for Rajang to not be absolutely top tier, it's that Rise base game Rajang was so just watered down. The legend was so just dried out in base game Rise. He was painfully easy in that game. He got they loaded up Rajang full of tranquilizers in Rise. He was toned down from Iceborne a little bit, and then just given like nothing to compensate for wire bugs, really. That's the biggest knock against him. That's really the biggest knock against him, is that he just wasn't all that great. He gets bulked up a little bit in Sunbreak, and then he has like a hazard Rajang in Sunbreak, which really kind of is a bit of a return to form. Rise is not a good time for him. That kind of sticks in the mind a little bit because that's the most recent interpretation of him. So he is definitely, his most recent outing is definitely kind of been his lowest point, and that stinks. Everything back before that, Rajang's been just this absolute king. So second generation comes around, you have Congalala, you have Blangonga, you have these goofy monkey looking guys, and then at the same level of power as the Elder Dragons and like the top level like flying wyverns is just this massive jacked monkey with minotaur horns that is so berserk fast, so blindingly oppressively strong, blitzing hunters left, right, and center. Incredibly tough to deal with. Doesn't help that there's some jank-ass hitboxes with some of his attacks in those second generation games. I've seen them, so it's a little bit less easy to capitalize on just because there's some fundamental problems with those games. But man, oh man, was there just this crazy reputation about him. Fourth generation rolls out and he's still just absolutely off the walls, unchained quick, really, really cool. Takes a sabbatical for World because World is very wyvern focused because of the time resources and limitations in that game. Comes back in the first title update of Iceborne with just kind of like this big raucous remix to his musical theme. These super violent turf wars, probably one of the coolest cutscenes that we've seen for a monster in these games. He has all these unique interactions with the Clutch Claw and with the wall bangs, with the pin attacks. He has this awesome new pin attack where he just like cracks the joints in his shoulders before he goes in to beat the crap out of you. They canonized the need for him to feed on Kirin horns to empower himself with thunder abilities. They just made him nuts. he's a ton of fun in Iceborne, especially if you're running something that has tremor resistance on it. Like, I tend to prefer to run the Shara Ishvalda armor with a Rocksteady mantle against Rajang in Iceborne, just so I can work with his tremors very, very easily. Like, I think that particular loadout against Rajang's a lot of fun for me. Yeah, dude, he's super duper cool. He's got lightning beams, he's got his machine gun punches, he's got those lightning grenade attacks that he fires out. He used to be able to, like, leap up into the air and, like, spin dash like Sonic the Hedgehog. He's got his spin attack, just massive punches. He's got his, like, bullhorn rush attack that he got in Iceborne. So cool. The theme music is iconic, too. It's, like, it's fun, but it's also intimidating, and it's just got this really nice momentum and pace and kick to it. The implementation of, like, the saxophones that he got in his Iceborne variation of his theme song, that's the best version of his theme by a mile. It's super good. That's another knock against him in Rise, is his theme in Rise is about as hopped up on horse tranquilizers as he is. He deserves the reputation that he has, dude. It just stinks that he's just kind of neutered in Rise, but Rise did a fair bit of neutering, unfortunately, to a lot of classics, which is why, honestly, I've been a little bit hesitant to touch some of the second generation monsters for the highlight videos, because stuff like Rajang, Tigrex, and Narga have just not been in top form in Rise specifically. We'll talk about those two in a little bit. And that's like the only argument that there is to not put him in Fundamental Phenomenon, but really, is that a strong enough argument to keep him out? No. You kidding? No. It might knock him down a couple of points. Does it knock him out of Fundamental Phenomenon? No. Rajang is one of the greatest to ever do it. He's amazing. He's the king of the fanged beasts, Elder Dragon level monster, one of the first Elder Dragon level monsters that isn't obviously within that category. Just this absolute Chad champion, and, you know, as common as he has been, I want you to put him in Wilds, and I want him to just for the sake of making him a barbarian again. Then you got Furious Rajang, which is a variant. The first variant we're going to be covering in this tier list. Variants are a concept that is introduced in second generation. So variants, quick little refresher, are the normal monster. They are not born under different circumstances, but some process either temporarily or permanently alters their physiology, either due to a biological process or a trauma. But it's still fundamentally a Rajang. It's not born genetically different, but something happens to it. With this case is the Rajang loses its tail, and that becomes kind of like an inhibitor loss on his rage form. He's also commonly known as the Golden Rajang. His fur is always in its golden state. He will never go back to the full brown-furred Rajang. And on top of that, he can push his rage state even further than a regular Rajang can. Furious Rajang has been really well taken care of in 5th generation. For a good long while, he was a Rajang with a little bit more moxie to him, a couple of new attacks here and there. He's always just kind of been a Rajang, but always in that electrical state, always at full power, and then he can just progress to even further levels of power. Once you get into, like, Generations Ultimate, Iceborne, Sunbreak, they really just started to go nuts with Furious. So, Sunbreak permanently gave him back the massive rock throw that he lost from his Apex form in 4U. He's got those, like, electrical surge currents that he can put through the ground. He's got a leaping up attack where he can do, like, this straight line of thunder grenades. He's got that flying corkscrew charge attack. He's got all these really cool spectacle attacks. And the neatest thing about Furious Rajang, especially, I think they really, really nailed him in Iceborne and Sunbreak. So, because his tail is gone, the point you want to attack has shifted from his tail when he's enraged to his face when he's enraged. And a lot of his new attacks, mainly those, like, underground thunder currents and his keep up, like, thunder blast one, where he shoots the line of lightning, if you know how to deal with him, then his face is very accessible. So I feel like Furious Rajang does an exceptional job of rewarding you for memorizing his moves. And not even those two, but you also have, like, the one where he'll really kind of, like, hype himself up, go lunging up into the air, and just come back slamming down for that super high damage body slam. That also gives you pretty good access to his face if you know exactly what the timing is. Like, you can really get in there and really just kind of like thread the needle with his attacks, and you can get right in there up in his face and get those hits in. And I really like that, because his moveset is very, very oppressive, but very learnable. Very high reward for learning how he fights. And for that reason, I find Furious Rajang to almost kind of be a comfort fight, because I love the flow of his attack pattern and seeing through what his moves do and threading that needle. And then all of it's just benefited by the fact that he just has badass attack after badass attack after badass attack. Big massive body slam, the thunder shockwaves, the lightning beam, his pin attack where he stuffs you into his fist and like breathes lightning on you and slams you down into the ground. Like, it's this non-stop absolute onslaught of the coolest animations out there. If there's one downside, it's that he doesn't look as good without a tail. That's kind of it. That's like kind of it. It's like regular Rajang with the tail looks better. I love the regular Rajang, but I'm very much in love with the Furious Rajang fight from 5th generation. Sunbreak especially. Sunbreak Rajang is one of my favorite fights going, because it is so fun and satisfying to learn. So I'm going to give Furious Rajang the advantage over the normal Rajang, because also, unlike regular Rajang, Furious really was not done all that dirty by Rise. This just kind of wasn't. He might be a smidge tougher in Iceborne just because of the nature in the combat of Iceborne, but in terms of like the learnability of the moveset itself and just like the combat design, I feel like Furious Rajang is in absolute peak form in Sunbreak. So, Furious has gone from a variant that I'm like, okay, yeah, you have Rajang, you have Furious Rajang, cool, you have the Golden Monkey on there too. Dude, get him in there too. Like, you put them both on the roster. Please put them both on the roster. And that's a really cool thing. So yeah, no, Furious Rajang is topping our list currently. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Carapacians, the crabs. Crabs are a little bit of a mascot for the channel, a little bit of an anti-mascot for my buddy Austin. Let's see how Connor ranks them on his tier list. So we start with Daimyo Hermitaur. You know, doing that video that I just did on the Carapacians really kind of endears them to me, because I just worked so closely with them for a good long chunk of time. Daimyo Hermitaur has a lot going for him. You know, you have the impact damage needed to break the shell, at least in previous games. You have his shield stance. You have his omnidirectional movement. You have his leaping. You have his digging. You have his pin attack. You have his strafing walk with his water beam. You have just the really cool animations with the monoblow skull coming off his back. You have just the genius idea in general to have monster skulls for hermit crab shells on the backs of these giant monster crabs. I like the fortressy design that he has going on with the massive broad shield pincers and like the more boxy design he has as opposed to Shogun and Shen. I think the big massive towering monoblow frill that comes up over his back really kind of pulls the look together. The red and the white look pretty decent, though maybe the teeniest bit undersaturated. A lot of really good personality. I love the sound effects that he has. Like, the crabs have a lot of really fun sound effects. That water beam trips me up a lot. And, you know, for such a lower level monster, there's a lot of little mechanics and stuff to learn about his combat that makes kind of picking him apart as a puzzle boss really, really fun. I think Daimyo Hermitaur works really, really well as a puzzle boss in the 2nd generation. Some of the stuff kind of got a little bit of diluted out in Sunbreak. And he's just so weak relatively that eventually you kind of hit this point where you can just kind of bulldoze him and not really give a crap about his mechanics, but a lot of effort went into the guy, and I appreciate that about him. I'm gonna say definitely keep him on the roster. He's definitely below Conga for sure, but very kind of similar to Conga. Really cool monster with a lot of really neat little gimmicks, little tools and tips and tricks that you can learn about the fight. I feel very similarly about Conga and Daimyo. But Conga I do like a smidge more. Plum Daimyo. Plum Daimyo is another one of our guys who hit bottom 10 in the popularity poll. This one is definitely less deserved than it is for Copper, because Copper's been gone for a good long while, has a couple of things of his own, but not too much. Plum comes back in 4 Ultimates. Had that luxury. And though they didn't give him a ton, they gave Plum some cool stuff. Mostly the semicircle walking patterns that he can do. So he's effectively a really good flanker, where he can just kind of come up and swing around you, go behind your shield and swipe at you. He can do his little skittering in that semicircle while he's firing off his water beam. He's really good at, like, just kind of boxing you in and then just picking at your defenses and swiping and smacking around at you before you can react to stuff. It takes the monsters, the Carapacians, which are already a little bit tough to react to because of their omnidirectional movement, or their four-directional movement, and then he just adds these whole different angles onto it, which makes him tougher to read, more difficult to read. The purple's a really good look on him. And the Diablo skull, as opposed to the Monoblow skull, really good. Both kind of like darkened. It makes him look a little bit bigger and a little bit meaner than the regular Daimyo is, you know, with the double horns and the darker coloration, both on the skull and on the crab. So it's a pretty solid redesign, honestly. Again, they didn't change too much. It was a very simple change that added a nice little extra layer of dimension to Plum. He also got Shogun's spin attack, so there's a little bit of extra stuff there. With Plum, I feel like with this guy, I kind of want to put him right here. Just needs a couple of tweaks. Because he's definitely, you know, where he landed on the list, definitely kind of a forgotten about subspecies. Even though I do think he has one really good change and a very solid design change, it still is kind of just like the one mechanic, and there's probably even like a little bit more you could do with it. You could probably put like the semicircle movements in while he digs if you wanted to do that. Play around with the double horns of the Diablos a little bit, maybe give it like Diablos' double head sweep attack that he has. I feel like you can kind of go a little bit further with Plum. I feel like you can really kind of play around with the Diablo skull itself. You can play around with the semicircle movements a little bit more. Work on the aggressiveness a little bit more, but I think he's pretty good. Shogun Ceanataur. I got a lot of love for Shogun Ceanataur. Shogun's one of those monsters that you go back and you play Freedom Unites, or I go back to my memories of playing Freedom Unite, rather, and there's definitely some intimidation there. The dude's tough. His damage falls off a little bit just because he's like a mid-level monster. Fundamental design concept behind him is tough. He has a lot of range, he has a lot of speed, he's really good at getting in, he's very good at punishing careless heals, very good at punishing careless attacks, and then the damage output he has is pretty decent. So it's really the oppression of his game plan which makes him kind of rough to deal with. He's very glass cannony. He's someone that if you know really well, you can kind of bully, because again, the Carapacians have the weaker legs that you can play around with. He's another monster who has developed very well over his history and his recurring appearances. Generations Ultimate and Sunbreak were both very good to him, giving him that kind of clashing claw lunge attack. Bleed was a really, really good choice for him because of the oppression of his gameplay, because if he applies that bleed onto you, then he's just gonna keep going and going and going after you while you're trying to get that bleed off of you. It makes him just that little extra bit more dangerous, so I feel like Bleed was a very, very well-suited mechanic to add to him, as it plays in with his plan very, very well. The design's really good, very sleek, very triangular, very, very sharp. Having the praying mantis sickle blade claws look really cool. He's got a very nice silhouette, honestly. He still has the shell on his back, but due to the fact that it's a lot smaller than the Monoblow skull, it doesn't really detract from the sleeker, narrower, more angular design that he has. And then you compound that with the Gravio skull that he has that can fire off his urine beam out of the back of him. Used to only be able to do that on ceilings. That's kind of changed as things has gone on, but it just adds like this little extra element onto him. Shogun's super good. Shogun's a super good monster. They just known how to work him. And they've covered a lot of his blind spots with a spin attack and with like this behind the back stab move that he has now. I just don't have any issues with him. There's just nothing wrong with him. The design's great, sound design's great, color is excellent. The how they built upon Daimyo is really cool. It's a very, very well put together fight. Not the most spectacular fight. Spectacular meaning, of course, spectacle. I really just don't have anything to complain about him. I think he's just fundamentally phenomenal. There is a gap here for sure. I'm not saying he's like right up as equivalent as Rajang. I think it's Shogun, half a mile, and then the Rajangs, honestly. But there's nothing I don't like about him. His gear looks sick, his armor looks sick, his ecology's pretty cool. It's just all good. And then there's Terra. And then there's Terra's Shogun. Oh boy, buddy. First of all, your recolor's pretty cool with like the dark browns and the very kind of like deep reddish oranges, the black coloration in the Gravios skull, meant to be a black Gravios, but they don't do anything with that. His claws are said to be sharper but softer. I don't know if that really resulted in anything mechanically. The one thing Terra Shogun had was that in second generation, out of the two, he was the only one of the Shoguns capable of firing off the water beam on the ground. He would open up the shell and fire it off in just a single straight shot. Not only can the regular Shogun do that now, but now he like sweeps it around and whatnot. So Terra's got like nothing. Terra's got a design that's kind of neat. That's about it. That's all he's got. Is anybody ever gonna come back around and salvage Terra Shogun Ceanataur? I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking maybe not. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not super confident that we're gonna see Terra ever again. Maybe. I'm open to being surprised, but like, I don't know, buddy. I don't really know. They need to think of something specific. If they wanted to... There's not even that much ecology to really work with. With Plum and with Terra, their body changes are the result of a dietary shift, but I don't think they ever gave specifics on what that dietary shift is. Terra is said to be able to inhabit more volatile environments than a regular Shogun, but he's just on the same maps. He's in the swamps and he's in the volcanoes, and it's not even like he carves out a different niche of the volcanoes. He goes to the same regions that the regular Shogun goes to. The regular Shogun could go in as deep into the volcano as he wants, so can Terra. So the dude just doesn't have anything. They could maybe want to like play around with the fact that he has a black Gravio skull and add like some fire into the kit, maybe. I don't know. Like, I really don't know. Someone's going to have to come around and actually do something. Terra's going to go... He is a Shogun, right? So he still has the qualities of a Shogun Ceanataur. But even at that, he doesn't have all of the modern improvements. He's as good as, like, a second-generation Shogun Ceanataur, which is still really good. But just, like, as a variation, there's just not much. I don't know. Am I really going to put him under Giadrome? It's just, like, who really cares? Like, at least with Giadrome, he's, like, the monster that introduced the snowman debuff. At least he, like, introduced a debuff. And then you have Bulldrome, right there. We'll go with that, I guess. And then Shen Gaoren. Shen Gaoren needs a little bit of help. He's a bit better than Lao Shen Lung. He's another one of your monsters that is this massive, lumbering, prototype siege battle before they got kind of good with the Morans and Tri, where it's just a big, hulking dude meandering down a hallway. He's a little bit more aggressive than Lao, with a couple of claw sweeps and slams that can potentially hit people. He does have his acid cannon out of the Lao Shen Lung skull that he's got out of his back, but that's more aimed at castle walls than actual hunters. You really kind of have to try to get hit by it. Pretty sick, honestly, to take a Japanese spider crab, which is this massive long-legged crab, and then just make it utterly colossal. Gigantic, just eldritch god crab, which is just a cool design choice in of itself, right? Like, I like that a lot. That's super sick. The Lao Shen Lung skull adds a lot to the silhouette. Very neat design. The colors are nothing really to mark about. He's just kind of gray. His legs will go red if you hit him. That's kind of interesting. Like, the silhouette is cool. The color really kind of is whatever. Shen needs some help. Shen definitely needs some help. He's just big and slow and lethargic and doesn't really do much. Kind of like Lao. This was back before they really knew how to really build up the big fights, and he hasn't come back since, so he hasn't had the help that he really needs. He gets some stuff in Monster Hunter Online, but even then, it's not crazy. Like, it's not a whole massive upheaval that really saves the fight. It's just a little bit more aggressive, and they throw in some raid mechanics because Monster Hunter Online is an MMO, like a borderline MMO. So, I don't know if I can... He's a bit weak, just because he doesn't really have that much to do. Just because he suffers from the Lao Shen Lung problem. Might change that. Again, I reserve the right to swap things around at the end. Then there's the Vespoid Queen. And Vespoid Queen is gag monster number 2. So there's King Shakalaka and there's Vespoid Queen. These are the two joke monsters that Dose kind of adds. I think it's Dose. Vespoid Queen kind of technically existed, but it was really just a giant Vespoid that you can get to occur. And then Vespoid Queen became her own monster proper in either Freedom Unite or Freedom 2. And she's got 2 attacks. She's got an interesting little gimmick where she'll only appear if you've killed 25 Vespoids, and she'll only stay in one zone, that being like the main nest in the jungle caves. For a giant Vespoid, I mean, the design's fine. So she's a giant Vespoid with a big fat abdomen and these like admittedly neat looking rainbow wings. And then she's also like kind of a swarm monster where she has this defense down gas that she can emit from her stinger. If you get afflicted with that, it makes the Vespoids around her more agitated and more aggressive. We're at the point where there's better swarm monsters than her. She has 2 attacks. She has defense down gas and a paralyzing stinger. And they're both the exact same animation. So it's cool to have a big bug, but she's really just a big bug. You look at the Celtices or Atal-Ka, and they're Monster Hunter-ified big bugs. Vespoid Queen is Saturday morning B-movie big bug. She's not Monster Hunter big bug. Maybe there's something to play around with there, but it's 2 things, same animation, neat little gimmick with the spawn, cool little history with being kind of like a fake monster before she got properly introduced. Why was she was like 82 in the popularity poll? I'm assuming that's a meme vote thing, but I don't know. I don't know. Bulldrome also only has 2 or 3 attacks, but at least they're different animations. And at least he's like a more like stylized version of a boar. This is a giant mosquito with 1 animation, but they make 2 different attacks come out of it. So, maybe Bulldrome will get knocked down later on, but again, bad for 2nd generation, right? It's not, there are more complicated monsters that are worse. Purple Gypsaros and Cephadrome, but I don't know, man. Okay, Tigrex. Tigrex is one of just the pure, simple, coolest things they've ever made. From a creature design standpoint, I think Tigrex is just one of the most perfect things they've ever constructed. It's the head of a Tyrannosaurus Rex on the body of a 4-legged tiger dragon. He's got the V-winged arm wings, tail is nice and simple. Body shape's nice and simple. It's just pure, raw fury and power. They just took all of the coolest predators, real and not real, that ever existed and turned it into the ultimate hunting machine. There's so many cutscenes of Tigrex chasing down the player character, chasing down Aptonoth, and chasing down Popo. There's so many Tigrex chase scenes. It makes montages of Tigrex very, very easy to do, because he's just always trying to kill something. Even though Zinogre is the most popular of the Monster Hunter monster, and Diablos is also a mainstay but has been around longer, I think if we're talking about salt of the earth, fundamental icon of Monster Hunter, it's Rathalos, Rathian, Zinogre, and Tigrex. It really is. Tigrex, I think, at this point is probably in 4th place on that because Zinogre is just so popular. Tigrex is so beautifully simple. Just this charge down, perfect predator, nomadic, absolute monster. High endurance, high power, high speed, not particularly agile, and not super intelligent, but not a moron either. It is just built to kill and to shred and to eat and to consume. I do like over-the-top, more stylized, more kind of experimental, a little bit kind of fantasy-esque Monster Hunter monsters, but just the construction of a predatory animal. Tigrex, it's just perfect. I think he's just perfectly constructed. The gameplay is not the best. He's either been very simple or pretty simple and a little bit behind. I feel like Tigrex is yet to peak in terms of combat. He can do some neat stuff. His charges are very iconic. He has his leaps, his bite attacks. He's got his paw slam where he can rip up chunks out of the ground, and that can turn into ice if he's on a snow map. His big bellowing roar that can inflict damage in an AoE is so cool, though I believe the AoE of it has been nerfed in 5th generation, and that should be rectified. That's something I do not appreciate about 5th generation Tigrex, is they took the coolest thing about him and made it so that you have to be, like, giving him a hug to be hurt by his roar. I think that's not cool. I don't think that should be the case. I think if you see him rearing up for that roar, you need to get the hell out of dodge. So, very simple early on, but combined with just how fast he was, how much damage he did, the limitations of player movability, and also just, you know, some genuine issues with enemy hitboxes, Tigrex built up a very famed reputation for how just kind of unforgiving and unrelenting and just uncompromisingly simple and merciless he could be. And then you bring him back in some of the newer games, and you iron out a couple of those issues, give him, like, just a couple of new attacks that are pretty good. So he's got, like, his turnaround and then leaping, slam down paw. His spins have been given a little bit of extra stuff. He can, like, combo out of his charge attacks a little bit better. Like, they've built on him fine. But I think he's really waiting for that idea to come along where it just really blends in with his moveset really well and makes you go, holy crap, that's sick. Brute Tigrex, I think, builds on him super well. So I don't want to go into, like, building into, like, the roars too much and whatnot, but just some kind of, like, ability to chain his attacks together, chain his attacks into his roars, without stepping on Brute's toes. Like, that is one thing that I think, honestly, might hold regular Tigrex back just a smidge, is that Brute Tigrex really kind of builds on that roar gimmick very, very well, to the point where if you change that too much in the core Tigrex, you might be stepping on the toes of Brute, and Brute's a really good subspecies, so you gotta kind of finagle a way to really kind of make the core Tigrex feel new without tripping over that landmine. So I think he's definitely waiting for, like, a Sunbreak Rathalos type of treatment, where just someone comes up with something and it just fits so super well into the moveset. It's really fun to play around with. It works with the other moves really well. There's something out there. There's some way to try to expand on his combos, play out his combos. There's definitely something out there, I think. And that's really kind of like the only thing that holds Tigrex back, is as some of the other monsters are starting to get a little bit more complicated, he is so unapologetically simple that he really needs a reinterpretation of that simplicity that is in and of itself complex, that he can kind of keep up a little bit. Because the fact that he is so simple makes him a little bit tough to build on. And it's made it so that there's just other monsters that do cooler stuff. You know, you have other absolute powerhouse barbarian physical attackers like Nergigante, like Bloodbath Diablos, that have just really kind of push into that extra level of power. So that non-elemental fury that Tigrex has, it's gotten a little less special as things have gone on. And for that reason, he feels a little old. Just a little bit, though. I do think Iceborne was a pretty good outing for him. I think they really kind of showed off his power really well. And then, you know, Rise, he's just good. Rise and Sunbreak, he's good. He's fun to fight. He is a good fight in Rise and Sunbreak. Probably one of his best constructed fights, just because they added some nice little new chunks to him. I do enjoy his fight very much in that game. There's other younger monsters that do a lot of what he does and just have that extra level of oomph and crazy to him that I think that Tigrex really needs. But I can't stop harking on the fact that he's just such a well-constructed animal. I love him as an animal. And I really like him as a fight. I'm waiting for that extra bump. Tigrex in Wilds is something that I'm rooting for, because I'd really like him to just kind of hit that extra notch. I'd love for Tigrex to be really nice and scary again. Like, the creature itself, the animal, and, like, the icon of Monster Hunter do so much for him. It's odd, because I think I like him on, like, a conceptual level. I like him on a conceptual level more than Shogun. But I feel like Shogun has, mechanically, what Tigrex needs, which is just an understanding and an appreciation of the fight, and really just kind of finding these really cool creative tweaks to play around with what he has and build on it. So I feel like Shogun has been more actualized and is more in peak form currently in this moment than Tigrex is. But I think as a monster, as an animal, as a creature, as a construction for this game series Monster Hunter, I think Tigrex is perfectly executed for what he is. And then something that I brought up a lot in the Christmas special is what Tigrex and by proxy Nargacuga mean for the classifications of monsters in Monster Hunter, where he is this dude who comes in as a flying wyvern. In first generation, flying wyverns are all very, very regimented. They're all built the same way. They're all built on the Rathian skeleton with maybe some slight changes in posture and then just a different monster built on top of that rig. So the upright on two legs, body that's off the ground, parallel to the ground, big wings that come up off of the shoulders and at an angle. Tigrex takes that and brings it into the more like kind of feline body structure. 4 legs on the ground, torso low to the ground, big, long, narrow tail, bigger head, more kind of feline in build. That complete reinvention of the flying wyvern category is incredibly important due to the fact that it kind of branches open all these other monster categories that, like, you're not stuck and regimented to this one thing, this one skeleton for this one group and classification. You know, you can take the concept of a flying wyvern and go in these different branching paths with it and really kind of like push and pull and see where you can take the concept of 2 back-limbed, winged, 4-limbed creature. You can go with this more 4-legged feline design, the more traditional wyvern dragon design, and then this applies to a whole bunch of other monsters. You can take Piscine wyverns and go off of different shapes and sizes of fish. The fanged wyverns, which is the Nogre coins, are in all these different branches that go in all these different very cool directions. You have the Neopterans, the bugs that branch out, they're all pretty uniquely designed from one another. I don't think any of them really share a rigged skeleton with one another. And I think Tigrex is very, very synonymous with that idea that the limitations of the monster categories are in of themselves these methods through which you can create creativity. And for reasons like that, I can't in good conscience bump Tigrex, even though I think like if we're going like very mechanically here, definitely. I think he peeps up over Emeralds, and he would top keep him on the roster. Due to the construction of the creature, due to what he means to Monster Hunter in terms of creature design and in terms of like recognition of the brand, he's definitely here. And then if we were really striking that, he's definitely here. But if I'm going off of the mechanical stuff that I said, I feel like Shogun is in that peak form that Tigrex needs to be. But do I like Shogun more than Tigrex? As a fight in Sunbreak, yes. But only by that criteria. I might come back to this fight. Then we have Nargacuga. And Nargacuga is I have very similar thoughts about Narga as I have to Tigrex. Where, for very similar reasons, Nargacuga is a very simple monster. They take Tigrex and they make it about speed over power, about agility over bull rushing. Simple concept, hasn't really been elaborated on a ton. Nargacuga's starting to feel a little old. In Iceborne, he got bumped up a little bit in terms of the difficulty because he was a Master Rank exclusive monster. They had the bleed off of his tail feathers, or his tail quills, which was quite cool. Nargacuga, I feel like, here's the thing. Tigrex is so very straightforward in his combat that he's a little bit kind of tough to work with, and yet they found some neat ways to expand on his combos, and I think they need a little bit more. The thing that kills me about Nargacuga in 5th generation is that he is the more agile, the more quick, the more adaptable, the more quick reflex monster, that Nargacuga should be easier to expand on physically, and yet I feel like of the two, he is the one who is expanded on less. Alright, so let me actually, talk about why I do like the guy, because I don't want to just spend this whole section, overcompensating for the fact that I think there's a little bit of missed potential with him so far. What has Nargacuga actually got? Why is he a top-level monster? The design, talking about Tigrex, right, and just kind of the beauty of simplicity, I feel like Nargacuga even bumps it up another notch. It's just kind of exemplary beauty of simplicity. He's just one solid jet black color with a little bit of extra red in the eyes and gold in the pupils. Just that little teeny slapdash of color in there. Just this sleek, lithe, built for speed and agility and just grace and cunning. Tigrex is just a pure predator in the fact that he's an engine of destruction. And then you have Nargacuga, who is this brilliantly effective hunter from how he's built, the weaponry that he has, the speed that he has, his nimbleness, as well as his ability to mix things up with projectiles, the razor-sharp wings that he has, the quills he fires out of his tail. I think there's a degree of elasticity in his tail so that it can extend slightly longer than someone would be able to perceive. Going off of that, dude, the double tail slam that he has is such a cool tool, especially in his original appearances, back when people weren't particularly used to him. And just the fake out in that double slam when he's enraged. You can kind of read it now, because when he's enraged and he has his spines out, you're kind of waiting for that second slam. But dude, like, older Nargacuga was really good at catching you off guard with that thing. It came out fast, it came out with a lot of damage. He used to also have that double tail break, where that double tail slam and his needles are such effective weaponry, and it's so difficult to get rid of them. It can still be kind of a meaty tail cut to get through regardless, but that double tail break he used to have was like a nice indication that this is a extremely potent weapon that this creature has, and like it's built up with a muscle structure with bones that are so durable to kind of keep this weapon where it should be, you know, attached to the body. And then just to kind of, you know, to like up the ninja aesthetic, he's got kind of like, you know how Batman has those blades coming off his gauntlets? It's kind of what he has, where there's a thin razor edge on the outside of his wing, so he can use both like the full might of his paw slams in and then back that with the slashing power on his wings. So it's pure force and it's cutting power backed behind that, which is really cool. I've always liked the kind of those like agile redirecting hops that he kind of has. You could probably play around with his AI where he's trying to like box you into traps and whatnot, or trying to back you into a corner, using those hops to really kind of pull your attention in the directions that he wants you to face. That could be a really cool idea, but just the animation in and of itself is a cool thing. Like, you're kind of just waiting for the attack to come in, but he's biding his time, he's leaping around, you don't know quite which angle and after which hop he's gonna come at you from. It's cool to just watch him hunt as he's stuffed away up in the trees, out of sight, and then just comes lunging out like a lightning bolt, usually coming after some small game that he can one-shot very, very easily. And then, you know, you have this mashed up amalgamation of panther and bat and kind of draconic elements. I kind of like the trend that Tigrex started with himself and Nargacuga and eventually Barioth, where a lot of these four-legged flying wyverns have a feline trend to them. You know, not all of them. You have like Giganox and Pariapuria and Duragawa aren't particularly feline, but you have a group of them that are modeled after big predatory cats. It's just kind of like a cool theme that I really like. I get the pure cool factor. He's incredibly sick. God, the concept is so good. I see the potential. I see the potential. Is Nargacuga gonna be a hot take? Oh, man. Okay. Let me be very clear. Nargacuga, the concept, the idea, what he should be, I think could be here. I think he could be a better combatant than Tigrex. I think you could just really nudge him out, because just the amount of agility and intelligence that this monster should have, and environmental interactions and use of trees and foliage that he should have, could bump him up to be a more interesting fight than Tigrex. I feel the potential of Nargacuga is here. The reality, so far, I think, is here. And that might get me in trouble, but I think that's true. I do think that's true. I think the reality of Nargacuga is here. It's not like they don't recognize what he can do, because he's leaping out of trees and jumping out of shadows in his intro cutscenes. I've said this like 4 times already. But he just doesn't do that in-game. And I feel like his combos could really be expanded on, but they just kind of haven't. The design is really, really good. Very sleek, jet black, mix of like rattlesnake and panther and bat with swords coming out of his wings and whatnot. Super good conceptually. Super good potentially. And if that's my hot take, I can live with that being my hot take. He's not down there because I don't like him. He's down there because I know that there's more in there. Alright, let's talk about the big guy, Akantor. Akantor is just the devil. He's this big, spiky, cool, ugly, gnarly demon that's just lurking out in these remote lava islands. The dude's so powerful that he takes Gravios, this absolutely titanic lava-dwelling flying wyvern. It's like the largest non-elder dragon in the original games. Just pick him up and like casually toss him and snap its neck. Like that ecology cutscene that Akantor has is sick. This thing's just an absolute demon living out in the edges of the world. I love the design of Akantor. The fight of Akantor is quite good too. He is very much modeled after Tigrex, but gigantic and slower. A little less oppressively brutal and a lot more lumbering destruction. I think the biggest issue facing Akantor currently is the similarities with Tigrex. I think that's kind of like the bulk of the problems, is he also has the super powerful roar, but it's bigger and it's louder and a massive blast radius. He does have like the wind tunnel roar, which is awesome and this very terrifying attack. But, you know, he has Tigrex's roar. And he has Tigrex's, like, charges. Kind of plays around a little bit more with, like, the sweeping tail and the paw sweeps and whatnot. But he is very massive Tigrex. And I think that is the only thing that holds him back a bit. The design is impeccable for how just, like, crazy it is. The gear looks amazingly cool. The fight is quite good because it's built on a really good foundation with some good new stuff added. Again, the wind tunnel roar, the big tail sweeps, the paw slams. Once you get into like the 4th generation versions of Akantor, I think you can get Dragon Blight off of his tail or defense down off of his tail. Something gives you defense down, something gives you Dragon Blight. One of them is his tail. I'd have to look off of that. But the fact that he can do defense down is horrifying because he already does a mountain of damage in every individual hit, and with defense down he can kind of just one-shot you with anything. So he's just mad cool. And then you have his burrowing underneath the lava maps that he does, which coughs up like these big flaming geysers and whatnot. You know what else? Akantor's music is not fantastic. It's not great. I've kind of softened on it a little bit, but it's an odd composition. It never felt like super duper fitting for what just a bleak, dark lava demon he is. It's kind of odd. It kind of feels like a theme for the fight against Akantor and not so much a theme for Akantor. Yeah, no, he's got all these crazy spikes going everywhere and these massive tusks. I think, yeah, no, he definitely could be like elaborated on. Oh, he's also got that pin attack where he just is super simple pin, but he's just so massive that he crushes you under his foot and he's just trying to grind you down into the ground. Super cool monster. Super cool. Like I said, move-wise, he's a little bit in the shadow of Tigrex. Got some of his own stuff. Great design. Really good monster. Really good monster. Ukanlos. Disrespected Ukanlos. 107th in that popularity poll is whack. That is just false. Ukanlos is really cool. In terms of the actual combat, I think Ukanlos kind of kicks Akantor's butt. Because Akantor's got a really good fight. Ukanlos has a really good fight. With his ice beam, and the massive shovel chin that flings ice everywhere, and that undulating shark attack dorsal fin move where he goes underneath the ice and comes charging and snaking after you. That attack is horrifying. Got a couple of like Akantorisms in there too, with like the tail moving around, big paws, can charge at you. His roar can send these ice stalactites coming crashing down on the map. The combat of Ukanlos has more of its own identity than Akantor's does. Akantor is super omega god demon Tigrex. Ukanlos is a little bit more just Ukanlos. The design's really good. Less edgy than Akantor. A smidge less cool. Nice and like big and burly and chunky. He's like a big beefy brawler looking dude. Because, you know, Akantor looks big because he has all these spikes. Ukanlos is just big. He's just mass, and I like that about him. He's just a tank on legs. The adaptation of his chin, which digs up and carves through ice, is a really, really cool method of digging that I've always really liked, and it can also just throw up a whole bunch of snow and whatnot. It's a really cool weapon for him. Also, Akantor's theme song is kind of mid. Ukanlos' theme song is sick. Dude, that piano that comes in, and then the male chorus comes in, dude, and it's just, again, has this really big, like, very heavy tempo to it, but it's also got, like, a lot of momentum. It's so suiting for this big hulk of a monster. Ukanlos is dope as dude. I love this guy. I'm gonna put him right here. I think 6th generation Akantor and Ukanlos. Let that happen, please. That'd be so cool, dude. Alright, let's talk Lavasioth. Now, a lot of people who are a little bit newer to things might say, ooh, Lavasioth, bad, bottom tier, easy. Let's talk about Generations Ultimate Lavasioth. Let's talk about actual Lavasioth. Lavasioth is kind of a cool monster. Another one of the Frontier guys, with Hypnocatrice and eventually Espinas, that came over. Unlike Hypnocatrice, Lavasioth had the opportunity to come back in Generations and Generations Ultimate. And also World of Iceborne, we'll talk about that in a sec. Lavasioth is kind of a cool monster. He's a little shorter than Plesioth, but he's also still rather big and a lot heftier and heavier. So he still has the size. So he still has like big tail whip and big hip check. He's a little bit more compact and a little bit more full of mass. And also with his tail whip, he actually brings his tail down to the ground. So you're not just getting kind of clipped by the little wafty tail bits of Plesioth's tail whip. You're actually getting struck by the actual tail of Lavasioth. He's a lot less fundamentally frustrating than Plesioth is. He's also got some cool moves. He's got his own dig attacks. He can actually kind of like turn the fish flop into his own attacks. He's got some lava projectiles he can play around with that are kind of cool. Lavasioth in GU is like actually a solid, good fight. Like a good fight. I still think Beatotus is the best Piscine Wyvern because he's got a lot of his own flair and panache, very good sound design, expertly animated, the snow effects are very cool, has some good dynamic part breaks on him. So I still think Beatotus is number 1. GU Lavasioth is easy number 2. GU Lavasioth specifically. I have a theory. I have a conspiracy theory. World Lavasioth, I think, is a borderline mod. What I mean by that? We know that Nargacuga was kind of sort of planned for World. He was partially implemented, couldn't get the rig to work. You have Nargacuga in there, you might have Akantor in there. Because they're both almost like, in terms of their body shape and how they work, almost exactly the same. Because they were built exactly at the same time, with Gobel and Royal Ludroth being kind of slightly different, but Laggy and Akantor are built very similarly. Old GU and 2nd generation Lavasioth does not have the Akantor armor gimmick, where the armor will heat up in the lava and then it will cool down outside of it. Doesn't have that. So that might be a port over from a scrapped Akantor. Big reason why this doesn't really work for Lavasioth is the Elder's Recess just kind of really wasn't built for a monster to be swimming around in lava a whole ton. The cool thing about Akantor in his old maps, in both the Tri-Volcano and in the 2nd generation Volcano, is that he would consistently have access to lava to keep his armor dynamically shifting around. His digging attacks into the ground, very baked into Akantor's kit, and there was just lots of lava out there for him to run into to heat himself up just from like running into the map. Elder's Recess really kind of isn't built quite as much for that, and Lavasioth's kit is also not really built as much around that. So he is in environments that are not as much built for that lava traversal. He has a moveset that is not as much built for that lava traversal. So he has less access to abilities to continuously soften and harden and then soften and harden that armor, but he has that gimmick. And then additionally with Akantor, what you had with him is he has attacks where he can heat up his chest and he can heat up his beak. So he can heat up more parts of his body just with his attacks on his own. Lavasioth can do that too, just with the head. Akantor has a little bit more access to different parts of the body. The other thing with Akantor, you chip away chunks of his armor, then when stuff cools off, that armor that you've broken off of him doesn't fully harden, and now you're creating these more dynamic weak points on him, and those are all over his body. They're his forelimbs, his hind limbs, his tail, his back, his chest, his beak. Akantor is kind of like this thing that you can just kind of like break apart. Lavasioth was not built for that. On top of that, Lavasioth in World doesn't really have a lot of big moves from GU. He has almost exclusively Giadrome moves. I kind of think that Lavasioth and or Giadrome were kind of like or both, were kind of like this panic option. We can't get the Leviathans to work in this game. Let's get a Piscine in there. We have Akantor's fire gimmick programmed. We can put that on Lavasioth and just kind of like, basically like they took Giadrome and modded him into Lavasioth. and that has hurt his reputation to this day. Previous incarnations of the monster are good, like legitimately like 6, 7 out of 10. So I think Lavasioth is due for a run. A true, actual, real Lavasioth is due for a run back. He can't be a Gyarados clone again with Agnactor's gimmick slapped on his body. It didn't work. It didn't work for the map. It didn't work for the monster. It didn't work for the kit. So the GU Lavasioth, good monster, not the most mind-blowing thing. I don't want to like oversold it like they took one of the all-time greats and ran it into the ground. They took a good monster and ran it into the ground. So Lavasioth needs the run back. Lavasioth deserves a shot again. He deserves to actually be shown to the world that he is a legitimately respectable creature. We're going to put him right here. All right, Elder Dragon run. Kushala Daora is the flagship of Monster Hunter DOS. He is the father of the modern Elder Dragon. So that skeleton, the repel mechanic, a lot of the gimmicks with the elemental auras, the very kind of puzzle boss design that goes into the Elder Dragons, that is Kushala Daora. And the guys that came with him, but he's the flagship of the game that originated all those concepts. And he is the most fundamentally dragony dragon of the bunch. So I kind of give that credit mostly to Kushala Daora. And then, you know, you say very dragony dragon. He is this steel-shelled, heavily armor-clad dragon that is then wreathed in this hurricane force winds around him and is capable of conjuring and exhaling tornadoes. Dude's crazy. Dude's nuts. There's a lot of good stuff that goes into him. A lot of really cool ideas. The thing with Kushala Daora is I think we are posed to have the perfect Kushala Daora if you marry the World incarnation to the Rise incarnation. So the way he's always worked is his wind aura has always kind of been obnoxious, but you can shut it down either by dead-on targeting his head, getting poison in there, going for the flash bombs, right? So he's always been very puzzle bossy. There's a lot of ways you can shut down his wind to fight him, and then like his moveset was always kind of fine. I think in like GU, he flies around a crap ton. He's a little annoying, actually. And then the problem with the World Iceborne Kushala is the tornadoes lasted entirely way too long, and something about his AI was programmed for him to just fly up into the air, cling to those tornadoes, wait in those tornadoes, and spam his ranged attacks. That was something that was just baked into his programming. And, you know, you have the tools to deal with him. You have the poison, you have the flash bombs. Because the tornadoes last so long, those tools are kind of irrelevant. And then his wind aura can be a little obnoxious, but that was something you could always deal with. But they built him to be, his AI to be so annoying, and to just be in places where there was just nothing that you could do. Whether or not he did have weaknesses, he would sit in these inaccessible areas and fire off attacks that you couldn't retaliate to. Sucked. Then Rise comes in, and the fight in and of itself, the combat is very, very good. The tornadoes don't last too long. They're a little bit more oppressive. They're more offensive than they are defensive. He has more physical attacks. He has a little bit of dragon element infused into his claw strikes. He's just given a little bit like more flashy, cool stuff to do with his wind breath and with his tornadoes. The only downside here is that Rise is a game that doesn't really focus on monster gimmicks all that much. So the puzzle boss aspect of him is kind of gone. The wind aura is fairly irrelevant in Rise. And then also the universal change to Elder Dragons where the repel thing isn't so much a thing anymore. So we have the possibility here to get an absolutely phenomenal, perfect monster, I think. Where you have the fun combat, the aggressive combat, the really flashy tornado stuff, but you also have the wind aura and the puzzle boss mechanic. If you're able to meld those together, mash those together, bring those two together, and just like really kind of congeal the different versions of Kushala Daora that have been, I think you have just straight up like one of the coolest things ever made. I really think you do. The ecology is awesome. The design is awesome. The theme music's really good. The armor is very solid. The core ideas behind his abilities are all very, very cool. You just need to find that perfect balance, and you haven't done it yet. It's okay if he's a bit annoying, but World went too far. It's awesome if his fight's really fun, but you don't want to gut the things that make him special. You do that, I think you have legitimately just like one of the greatest of all time with Kushala Daora. With Nargacuga, it's a thing where you're showing me the stuff that he can do, but he's not really doing it mechanically. With Kushala, he's doing these things mechanically, but they're just not blending together in a way that is the most satisfying in terms of the gameplay. A damn near perfect version of this monster exists. It hasn't been perfected yet. I'm gonna say right here. There's so much good about Kushala. There's so many good ideas. He just needs that one push. He just needs to find that way to get the puzzle pieces to fit. You twist that puzzle piece just a little bit clockwise, it fits, it snags, you have an absolutely fantastic monster. You're just not there quite yet. He's really good in Rise, but his identity is just a little, you just had to neuter a bit of his identity to get there, and I don't think you have to do that. Rusted Kushala Daora. On paper, the idea is so cool. So you have a living metal armored dragon in the regular Kushala Daora. And to shed the skin, it's not like a traditional reptile where it just sheds. The armor like actually oxidizes, rusts over, and then snaps, cracks open to like this pearlescent Kushala Daora before that oxidizes and then goes over in like the full steel armor. So you have this period of time where you have this hyper aggressive Kushala Daora that's looking for the chance to kind of carve out a safe space that it can molt itself and break out of its armor, and it'll try and just kill literally anything to get that ability to do so. That lore, that ecology is sick. That's such a cool idea for a metal dragon. In terms of the gameplay, it doesn't seem like they quite know what to do with him yet. Not quite. He's a bit faster. He's a little bit more physically active. He flies a little bit less. That kind of makes sense. He's probably a lot heavier. I wonder if there's a way where you can make him feel more aggressive, but also kind of like slow him down a little bit, because he's covered in like this heavy metalloid, like rusted over armor. Probably isn't like, you could probably do something where he's stronger and he's like a little bit more tenacious, a little bit more just like kind of charge you down, but he can like, he doesn't quite combo as well as regular Kushala does, isn't quite as agile and as lithe as the other one is. You could probably make Rusted a little bit more tanky. I think for you, and you could probably even like just exaggerate a little bit more. They actually have like rust sound effects to his movements. That's sick. I don't really know how much you change the wind effects a little bit, but you could maybe do something with that. What also you can maybe do if you want to go kind of nuts is you want to take that like ecology cutscene that he has where like the metal bursts open. Maybe you could, and then you have like the pure white Kushala Daora. You could maybe do something kind of like that in terms of the gameplay where you're trying to crack away at his armor while you're fighting him. And it could be like a Tycoon Zamuza situation from Frontier where you're breaking away the shell and then you get just like this super duper fast, super duper aggressive, very, very vulnerable glass cannon, pearl white Kushala. Ecologically incredibly inspired creature that they just don't quite know what to do with the combat yet to make like the Rusted gimmick feels like it plays into the mechanics. He also has a very cool role in being the final village story for 4 Ultimate boss, where he has a history with the Ace Commander and his mentor. It seems like actually kind of remembers him, adds like a little bit of sapiency to the Elder Dragons, which is kind of cool. And just, you can fight it. He's very well known for the fortress fights you can go and face him down in. There's something really cool here. I think he just needs a couple of tweaks. Just a couple of tweaks. I'm gonna put him right there. Chameleos. Chameleos got saved a little bit, I'm gonna be honest, with Rise. If it wasn't for Rise, my opinion of Chameleos would not be the highest. Let's talk a little bit about like the older versions of him. Again, very, very cool concept. I think he's one of the most unique Elder Dragons ever made, especially in terms of like Elder Dragons that are on a more conventional Elder Dragon frame. You have like unique ones like a Yama Tsukami, like a Nakarkos, like a Sideas that are they're unique because they're just their own thing. They're not really like dragons. They fall into that like subcategory of Elder Dragons where they just kind of defy traditional categorizing, so they just slap them in Elder Dragon. In terms of like a dragony dragon, so 4 limbs, head, breath weapon, wings coming off of the back, Chameleos is probably the most unique, the most personality filled of that like more traditional Elder Dragon branch. Unfortunately, his fight was never great. He was a massive health tank with a lot of kind of like just meandering animations. He would just kind of like sit there and like take a whole bunch of hits a lot. His attack animations weren't the coolest ever. And then he was kind of cool in that could have these very, very sudden bursts of speed. So he has kind of like a cadence to his fight, which is kind of slow, methodical, slow, methodical, slow, methodical, then burst. Usually with his tongue attacks, right? Which he'll try and go to grab at your items. And it was never a fight that I loved. It was never a fight that I super enjoyed. I kind of respected some aspects of it, but I never loved the fights. Rise Chameleos is really cool. The only thing that kind of stinks about Rise Chameleos is they took away the item stealing and they took it so that he steals your Spirit Birds, which is just, who cares, right? Like the item stealing is obnoxious, but man, does it make it so that you don't want to get hit by that tongue. Like it's more nerve-wracking, right? So that I'd say like the trade-off is kind of worth it in hindsight. Like it's annoying in the moment to have a max potion stolen, but I don't know, it makes more sense. It's in like a grand scheme of things, it is more intense that way. It is more invigorating that way. They upped his poison a lot. They really like solidified his stance as the poison elder dragon. Just gave him more to do, more projectiles, more control with the wind gusts with his wings, bigger clouds. There's just more poison, more poison. And you know, that can be kind of annoying, that can be dangerous, but I feel like it's balanced in such a way that like it's perfectly like manageable, but he can definitely catch you and stuff if you're not being careful. You really kind of have to pay attention to the currents of his wings and whatnot. I really like the attack where he just vomits down a thing of poison, leaps up into the air, and then that comes out as the gas cloud ring, and then he'll just whiff that off into whole different directions. That plays really well into the wire bugs where you can just zip line over those clouds, or you can get caught up in them very easily if you're not being careful. A lot of really cool poison attacks. He still has kind of like the meticulous and then burst, but the cadence is a lot faster. So there's a whole lot less of just whacking at him. So he feels a lot less damage spongy. That was something I always felt like he was very damage spongy, but they paced him up quite a bit. The body slam that he has is kind of goofy. It just kind of leaves him exposed to take a whole crap load of damage, especially with how counter-oriented Rise is. I feel like that attack kind of does him a little bit of a disservice. The invisibility is super cool on him, especially the combination with the fog, because you can still see like the light refracting off of him. You combo the invisibility with the fog and just kind of how quick some of his movements can be. There are legitimate times where I can lose track of where he is. So sometimes I can follow him quite well. Other times you just kind of like blink and he's gone. And the fact that they can pull that off with the light refraction invisibility is quite impressive. They added those little bits of bioluminescence onto him on like his tail and his horn, which give him a little bit of a glow to him that looks really cool. Yeah, no, they took a chameleon and made it a dragon. That's such a cool idea. There really kind of hasn't been anything quite like him since. Maybe like Valhazak and Namiel are both kind of like quirky elders, but even then, I don't think they're still very kind of like regal looking. Chameleos is just like a quirky ass oddball dude, and I really like him. Also, the new theme he got in Rise is so good. It's so good. He doesn't count specifically for this one, but the Risen Chameleos just even like further doubled down with even more just big, massive, lethal poison explosions and toxin and whatnot. Yeah, no, he got really, really good. I'm gonna say keep him on the roster for sure. I'm gonna put him, I think like right here. Okay. So, there's biases, right? There's bias. You love what you love. Let's try and keep this objective, because this is my guy. You can tell. You've seen the channel logo. You've seen my thumbnails and whatnot. This is my dude. This is my buddy. This is my white whale. This is the guy who's been around with me for a very, very long time. A guy who means a lot to me. So how good does he actually stack up? The answer's really good. Brachydios was the best thing that ever happened to Teostra. Right? Brachy comes in, brings in slime that gets turned into Blast. Blast gets applied to a lot of older monsters. Teostra being one of them. Gets Blast added to his repertoire. Because he always had the ability to shed a whole bunch of his scales, which are like this powder, detonate them into these explosions. So that gets retooled into the Blast powder. Really, really cool. Then World comes along. And what they do is they shift Teostra into a dual state monster, where he has a blast state and he has a fire state. And this series of states, his attacks are slightly different in the two. He also just massively overhauls the properties of almost all of his attacks based on what form he is. And you can pay attention to certain visual indications on his mane and just like how deep and dark his coloration is, or how bright and fiery his coloration is, to indicate which one of the states he's in. Which One of them will have like a powdered breath attack, the other one has a flamethrower. One leaves fire in the wake of him running, one leaves glass clouds in the wake of him running. He has like that downward fire breathing inferno attack. He has like the atomic sneeze attack in his blast state. They played around with him so much. The dual state thing has been so good for him. They have their own unique attacks, they have their own shared attacks with altered properties, and then Rise and Sunbreak comes in, and then they just expand on that even further. So you already have this impressive elemental repertoire that he has, and then you build on that by then making him a more competent physical fighter with a better combo ability. They start to lean away from him being a charge heavy monster into like a little bit more combo heavy. He tries to trick you into moving into his gas clouds, which he'll detonate. He has that like double paw sweep into the tail swing combo that leaves more powder up in his wake. He tries to trick you. He tries to box you in. And I haven't even mentioned the Supernova, which is iconic. It's one of the first named ultimate attacks that a monster has. Ultimate, like super moves. The Supernova is one of the first ones ever made. And then his personality is a really excellent template for a lot of the other 5th Elder Dragons who precede him, of the very kind of like regal, upright position that he has. A lot of the other elders kind of act like he does and have the personality that he does. He has we'll talk about her in a second, but the species in of itself is sexually dimorphic. The flame aura has been less and less of it. It's kind of like a Kushala instance where the flame aura has been less and less important. It's not tied to the Hornbreak anymore. You can still take a little bit of chip damage, but the chip damage on that flame aura isn't all that impactful. I'd say that's the biggest nerf he's taken. Holy crap, dude. He's so good. Like, I'm sure that they'll continue to keep kind of like building on him and whatnot, but I feel like he's one of those monsters that has absolutely hit like his peak form, and now they're just kind of like tooling, they're just noodling around with him a little bit. Mechanically, he is there, he's at his potential. Now, like, all right, we're in a different game, let's just kind of like play around with a little bit, play around with like interactions a little bit, just kind of like noodle around with like this really, really like we have the framework done, we're just gonna like, everything else is just kind of details. And the design is super cool. Taking the dragon look, bring that regality in by mixing a dragon with a lion to go with a very, very kingly distinction. You have the mix of the red and the orange and the violet in with the color scheme, with these brilliant, piercing blue eyes, which look beautiful in the 5th generation games. I think the body could use maybe like a touch more saturation, though I do kind of like how the ashen purple really looks on him when he's like fully depowered. I think that looks quite good. But then you kind of have like that flame that builds up in his fur and whatnot when he gets angry, and it's just so cool. And he just builds up in anger and rages and rages and rages until that supernova pops off. He's so good. I understand why some people have trepidations about the fire dragons from 2nd generation, because admittedly 2nd generation Teostra and Lunastra and 4th generation Teostra kind of are not the best designed. They have the 0 to 100 charge attacks with no wind up. The movesets are fairly simple. It's like paw swipe, leap, charge, flame breath, explosive powder. That's kind of the bulk of what he has in 2nd generation. And I know that's why some people have a bit of a sour taste in their mouth about Teostra. I understand that. But look at how much he's improved. Look at just how well designed and compact and just perfectly constructed his combat is. He's intelligent, he's multifaceted, different sets, ultimate attack, alterations in his moveset based on state, fantastic design that really just kind of cements the personality purposefully. The only issue there is that a lot of other Elder Dragons kind of become personality derivative of him, but that's not entirely his fault, really. It's just that other people kind of copy him. But it's that regal personality is baked fully, truly for him. And kind of Kushala, too. And Velkhana fits it as well. But something like a Valhazak or a Namiel or a Camellia should probably be a little bit quirkier, a little bit more high personality, and not quite have that same kind of loftiness to them. I feel like I've barely taken a breath. You can tell why I love him. It's not even just like the personal story that I've had with him, but just the way he's evolved has been so well done. Kushala Daora is, I think, probably potentially a little bit more mechanically interesting because his air power can be such an inconvenience if not taken away from him. The fire aura that Teostra has isn't quite so much as baked into that kit, so I don't think, like, mechanically he's quite on that same level of mechanical complexity. But unlike Kushala Daora, I think they've managed to take what he has, what he's built on, and then really just perfect it. I feel like Teostra is in that peak form that Kushala is not in. That even kind of like Chameleos is not in, because they nerfed his item grabbing. His belly flop is really kind of easy to hit, and I feel like Chameleos really should be in a less actiony game, kind of like a World or like a Wild, so that he can just be allowed to be weird. I think I want to be careful about the personal bias. What I was talking about with Furious Rajang, with just how, as much as Teostra's moveset is really, really good, I feel like the learnability of Furious Rajang's moveset is just that little more extra satisfying to go up against. I feel like Furious Rajang still has one of the most fun fights going for him. Teostra's is incredibly good. It doesn't have quite that same invitation to mastery that I think Furious has. Okay, let's talk about Lunastra. Lunastra, for a good long while, was a forgotten Teostra clone. Sexually dimorphic species, she was the definitive female. Slightly different horn structure with a more rounded off, kind of bulkier head plate as opposed to Teostra's more traditional horns. Blue scales and blue fur over red and orange. The way the hair is modeled is slightly different. Gone for several years. Makes a title update surprise appearance in World. And she is controversial, because she is tough. Whereas Teostra takes fire and makes it into this massive, concussive, explosive force. Lunastra takes fire and makes it this sweeping, all-encompassing, apocalyptic hellscape type of fire. Her flames sweep in several directions, coat the whole area. She leaves a lot of residual fire behind from her attacks. Her supernova is tough to deal with. You gotta be ready to, you either gotta interrupt her out of her charge and like keep interrupting her out of that charge, or you gotta be ready with a fire mantle, because she is going to melt you down into sludge. And not a lot of people appreciate that. But Lunastra is good under the same rules that Kirin is good, under the same rules that Elatrion is good. Lunastra is a monster that forces you to play her game. World is not always the best about that. So bringing monsters in like that can sometimes make people a little antsy. I wish 5th gen was a little bit better about about forcing hunters to take counteractives to monster gimmicks. Rise especially, but Lunastra's not in there. You need to be able to counter her supernova. You should be bringing tools that can deal with the supernova if it goes off. It is good knowledge to have that you can douse her flames with water weapons. You should understand how Lunastra works. Lunastra's mechanics should be managed. You can manage her mechanics and you can counter her mechanics with defensive skills, with defensive tools, with the right weapons. She is quite manageable. Still tough, for sure. Still dangerous, but quite manageable. Also, her tail flips are just obnoxious. You gotta knock that tail off of her. She loves to do that. Tail sweep and leave the fire behind. That's probably the most annoying thing about her, is the tail sweeps, not the Inferno Nova. You gotta play the game. You do gotta play the game. And I do appreciate that. I think that's really good. Also, I in my whole like rave about Teostra, I didn't even talk about his theme music. Theme music's great, by the way. And then Lunastra comes in with her own remix. Never had a remix before World, but she comes in, and then there's kind of like this very, still has the power behind it, but now has kind of like this more graceful, kind of like feminine air to it. So it has like masculine power and kind of like a femininity beauty to it, which the composer was able to blend very well with the instruments that were added and the vocals that were added. That Lunastra's theme is very, very cool. A great remix of the Teostra theme. I think she's great. I think she's really good. And if she gets brought back, I hope she's not nerfed into the ground because people were annoyed by her. People just need to learn. And honestly, I think it's a little bit of World's fault. The monster gimmicks aren't that oppressive in Worlds. So then when you get monsters whose gimmicks are oppressive, that kind of caught a lot of people off guard. So I think a little bit of the flack she caught is a little bit the fault of the game that she came from being a smidge more casualized than some of the previous entries. But I think her game plan in of itself is very well done. She is kind of like this ticking clock monster that you really have to work against and really just kind of actively work to sabotage her techniques, or she's just gonna melt you down into nothing. That's really cool. There aren't a lot of monsters that you have like a ticking clock that you can kind of counteract against like that. You know, Elatrion's another one like that. I like Lunastra a lot. I still think the dual states and the intelligence of Teostra, knocking you into his explosive clouds and whatnot, is a little bit more... I do think Teostra's a little bit more fun. You know, Luna you have to learn to work against. I think Teostra's just kind of like pure fun factor. I do think that, like... I don't know. I think Teostra's just like maybe like a smidge ahead. Luna over Rajang. I'll come back to that. Yama Tsukami. All right, we have 2 left. Big ol' weirdo. There's nothing quite like him, unless you look at Frontier. He is this big ballooned octopus eldritch monster, this giant freak of nature that can just fly without any reason to. These tendrils coming off of him, these colonies of insects living in him, human teeth for some reason. Big ol' weirdo. Cool concept, though. So, those of you who are very familiar with Freedom Unite might not know that in DOS, Yama Tsukami is a little bit different. In Freedom Unite, you just go up to the top of the ancient tower, and you fight him up there. The DOS fight is much cooler, because Yama will appear in, like, the midst of the tower, in certain areas that have, like, the spiral staircases that are going up, and he will be up on those spiral staircases in the middle of them, attacking you and fighting you. And you're progressively chasing him up the tower, up to the top of the tower to fight him up at the big climactic battle, up like way above the clouds and everything. And then there's certain areas where you can like see him lifting up and moving in between the areas and whatnot. Super cool. And there are these massive stairs that you can climb up and around on to try and get away from his attacks and get better angles on him and whatnot. Probably hardware reasons, limitations. Yama Tsukami isn't like that in the PSP games. Probably just couldn't work or something like that. The idea on paper of like fighting this giant god monster and then progressively chasing him through this ancient ruin structure up to the top of it, that is such a cool like narrative element to the fight. It's a bit limited by the fact that it's a PS2 game. There's only so much that Yama can do, and he's sequestered to these 3 zones where it's just like a big gap in the middle, so he's very stationary, just kind of slamming tentacles at you and throwing bugs at you and whatnot. I feel like Yama or something like a Yama should definitely be revisited. That kind of pursuit. It's kind of like Raging Brachydios, kind of, honestly. I feel like Raging's kind of a monster that took that idea and ran with it, where you fight him in this very scripted set of arenas down to like this one particular zone in the Guiding Lands where he creates the battle arena for you and you had this final fight to the death. You have that similar like pursuit narrative with Yama, but he's a little restricted by technology. He's a little restricted by the arenas that he's in, and, you know, he's a little restricted about just some of the ideas. I feel like you could bring Yama Tsukami back, bring this, like, tower chase idea back, with or without him. I think that just on itself is a really awesome idea. You could take a look at Yama Kurai from Monster Hunter Frontier to look at new moves for him. I just give him a little bit more room, I think. Give him a little bit more moves, a little bit more aggression, and there's something, you got something. The design is really cool. The music's like this like old, ancient, awesome battle theme. The symbiosis with the Thunderbugs is really cool. Again, the narrative of the fight in and of itself is a very neat idea that very few other monsters have really tried and worked with. He's just hasn't been around in a while, and where he's stuck, he had his limitations. So I think Yama Tsukami is a monster that definitely needs a couple of tweaks. I'm going to put him, I think, right above, like, the subspecies and whatnot. But I think, like, Blangonga and Lavasioth and Rusted already have pretty damn good fights. This is something really, really special, kind of just, like, waiting to happen. Cap off second generation with White Fatalis, or as they're kind of rebranding him to Old Fatalis. Ancient Fatalis, or like Relic Fatalis, or Ancestral Fatalis would have been better. Old Fatalis is kind of goofy. The White Fatalis is really sick. White Fatalis is an awesome monster. You know, if it is true that Fatalis is indeed a supernatural entity, White Fatalis is probably the most powerful thing on the planet. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. We're never going to get a straight answer to that mythology, and that's all right. Otherwise, it's probably Delamadur. But, you know, if this is indeed a supernatural creature, this is the ancient, ancestral, super wizened version of that supernatural demon creature. Trades out fire for this dragon-infused lightning. Looks amazing with, like, this glowing white bioluminescence in him. He has this hair that starts to grow out over his body, this mane that goes down his neck, forms a beard, looks great with the red eyes. I cannot wait to see what he would look like with just a very, like, proper new age render. Like, the Resurgence mods are good, but they're kind of limited in what they can do with, like, the hair technology and everything. I'd love to see, like, a proper, modern, like, fully modeled Fatalis, or White Fatalis, rather, and see what they could do. That Resurgence mod is so cool, what they were able to do with him, what they were able to kind of showcase as the potential of a 5th generation White Fatalis. He's definitely stuck back in, like, because unlike the regular Fatalis, he's still kind of stuck back in, like, 4th generation territory, back before they really knew how to make the Fatalises super duper cool. He's kind of in there along with Crimson, but Crimson also had the mega charged variation in 4U. White Fatalis hasn't had that. The Lightning Storm is still really good. The Lightning Blast are really cool. He's definitely the best of the 3 in, like, their original incarnations by far. Probably also maybe the coolest looking, though I do have a soft spot for how Crimson looks. Though the mane and the beard are so cool on White Fatalis. And a lot of the fan art for him goes really hard, too. Yeah, no, just like this ultimate god-level monster that's kind of waiting in the wings a little bit. You have the Frontier version of White Fatalis that has kind of that god-level power that we're really looking for. I think it kind of overdoes it on the design a little bit, though, like all the neon spikes and everything coming out of him. It wasn't really needed. I think you slap that moveset on the regular looking White Fatalis, I think you're really pretty golden. Yeah, no, I think he's definitely kind of waiting for a 6th generation version to really kind of show the true power behind him. He's a little left behind, like Elatrion's cooler than him at this point, and Safi'jiiva's cooler than him at this point, and Kulve Taroth has slightly better spectacle than him at this point. The regular Fatalis has a better spectacle than him at this point. Yeah, no, he's definitely the best of the Fatalises in terms of 4th gen and 2nd gen. He just hasn't had a modern incarnation yet. When he gets that modern incarnation, probably gonna blow out a lot of lists. But for now, I think he's just maybe like here. All right, let's go over things. So bad for 2nd gen, we have the 2 gag monsters. And that's really it. It's like the gag monsters are in the lower tiers of things. I'm fine with that. You know, you're a goblin. You have 2 attacks with 1 animation. Should Bulldrome be bumped back? Should Bulldrome be bumped back? I don't know, you only have 2 attacks too, buddy. You might be a little high, honestly. You are a cool-looking boar with white fur, though. Bit weak or kind of bad. You're a little bad. I think I'm going to bump you down. Terra, you're definitely weak. Giadrome, you're more interesting than Terra. You have the snowman buff, and I really like your colors. Shen Gaoren, you have giant 2nd generation monster syndrome. You just need help. Very cool idea, not an interesting fight. I'm fine with that. Copper Blangonga, give him a better render, and then give him a couple of new moves. You have an interesting subspecies that has a nice differentiation from the core monster. Hypnox got a lot of really cool personality to him that just needs a little bit of fleshing out in the mainline games, but in Frontier, they do go into what he can do a little bit more, and he does some cool stuff. Pretty good design. Nice midpoint between the bird wyverns. Definitely over Copper. Do I keep Plum over? Yes, because the semicircles are super cool. Do I keep Yama over Plum? Yes, the music is super cool. The design is very unique. The structure of the battle is incredibly cool. Blangonga, Lavasioth are definitely better fights, a little bit more actualized than Yama. And of those 2, I think Blangonga is definitely a little bit better than Lavasioth, and Lavasioth definitely needs the run back. He's hindered by a modern version. Blangonga is just a little bit hindered by Shadow. Rusted Kushala is a fantastic idea that just needs a little bit more work done to really kind of finalize this mechanic. Keep him in the main roster. I think you can keep, Daimyo. Yeah, keep Daimyo in the main roster for sure. For sure. Conga I like a little bit more. Emerald buffs things up over Conga in some good ways. Akantor's awesome. Akantor over Narga. A little bit in the shadow of Tigrex, a little bit in the shadow of Lost Potential. I'll take a slightly more unique thing over you, so I'm fine with that. Very high personality, got some of his mechanics nerfed a little bit, but I'll take, yeah, over that. That's fine. I'm gonna bump you over Shogun. Shogun over Ukanlos. Yeah, I feel like he's just so actualized. He's just in such a great place combat-wise. Kushala over Tigrex. I think Kushala over Tigrex. Tigrex definitely over Shogun. White Fatalis over, yeah, for sure. Rajang over White Fatalis. Rajang over White Fatalis. Yes, Iceborne Rajang was just too good. Lunastra over Rajang. Maybe Lunastra under Rajang. Lunastra over White Fatalis, I think yes, just because she was given so much cool new stuff. You're waiting for some cool new stuff. Rajang had a ton of personality in Iceborne, got nerfed a little bit in Rise, kind of wrote the ship in Sunbreak. But yeah, no, super duper fun in GU, super duper fun in second generation games and for you. Only really has just kind of like the one mid incarnation, and then you just don't quite have the same history, and you're really fun. I think you're just a little bit more fun. Super well actualized, amazing design, fantastic mechanics, nice and smart, and then just super awesome, amazing, very, very fun to learn fight. Okay, yeah, no, I'm happy with this. I'm good with this. Maybe a hot take here and there with how high Shogun is and how, I mean, like, he's still up there, but how, like, comparatively, the fact that Nargacuga isn't in fundamental phenomena, I'm telling you, it ain't him. He just hasn't been given enough. Like, it's there. Nargacuga could be, like, here. I feel like he should be here. But mechanically, I think he's there. You keep showing me things in cutscenes that he doesn't do in gameplay. That's the big thing. Yeah, no, I think we're good. Super duper top heavy. Look at that. A second generation is so good. There again, like I said at the top, there's sometimes monsters in other generations that kind of hit higher heights, but they also can hit like lower valleys, right? I think second generation is just a lot of really, really good ideas. Not the most complex ideas. In a couple of places it gets complex, but with a couple of guys that really just need a little bit of help, and a couple of other guys that, like, you're right there on the cusp of something good, but you just gotta push that, bump that, and maybe they've just been gone a little bit too long that they haven't been able to have that time that they need. And if they had come back by now, they'd probably be higher up, but the promise is there. So that's how I'm feeling about the second generation monsters of Monster Hunter. Feel free to yell at me about Nargacuga in the comment section if you so choose. Tell me how you feel about the monsters, what you thought about this tier list. I'm glad you enjoyed. And this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I will see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Nihilist Chimerax, Datboy Doinda Ding, Sir Newt Newt, Peaberry, Stefan Kalnin, Shaggy Grizzly, Pico Plush, and Daniel Delasarte. Thank you very much.